Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Shift with Gina. We have a special guest today. He is actually my first official guest since I've been doing my own YouTube. Hi.
Hi, Gina.
Welcome.
Thank you very much.
This is Alex. Alex, do you want to tell everyone who you are?
I'm Alex Feinberg 1 if you follow me on Twitter. I am a fitness trainer, ex-professional athlete, ex-Googler, hedge fund analyst, jack of all trades, master of some, I suppose. Also, wrapped up in all of that, if you pay attention to how the world works, is political commentator, which I think a lot of people enjoy. I would say, the various things that I've done throughout my life, whether it's work in Hong Kong, play professional baseball, learn the financial system, work in Silicon Valley, and then now work for myself, have provided me with a unique perspective that offends many and inspires some.
Well, so this podcast, I don't think I've even told you this. This show is kind of now an accompaniment to my women's health group. I have a health group called The Shift on Mighty Networks, and it's supposed to be a show about women's issues for women, but you're our first guest and you're not a woman. So
How do you know?
I was just going to say, now that we're in Pride Month, maybe it's an opportune moment for you to come in and talk to us about gender identity.
A special announcement to make for you.
But we're going to get into some stuff because I want to ask you a little bit about your thoughts on sort of the women's health issues happening today and how you think maybe they differ from some of the challenges that men face in terms of health and wellness, you know? I've been seeing a lot of these videos, I'm sure. Do you follow Alan? I think Roberts is his last name. Yeah, it's like I think he's
the fats of TikTok.
Yeah.
That's exactly what he's trying to make.
Yes.
The fats of TikTok.
The fats of TikTok, yes. And you see like all the videos that he finds, and it's always women. Like women are always the ones who are stuffing their faces, and they're like, "This is what I eat in a day." As a fat, beautiful woman who weighs 260 pounds, and like they're intentionally gorging themselves on this like disgusting food. And then you also look at the data of how extremely overweight individuals in America, it mostly skews towards women.
Yeah.
Right?
I think they're both.
Well, here's the thing. When it's obese, there's obese and there's extremely obese. For obese, I think it's pretty even.
Okay.
But then when you get to extremely obese,
that makes sense.
It's pretty clear that women take the lead in the margin.
Is it because the men die faster?
That's actually my question. Like, why is that?
So I think a lot of this actually has to do with capitalism, unfortunately, because I'm a believer in capitalism. I'm not a communist. I hate communists. My grandparents died at the hands of communists. But so if you realize that the American consumer is an overweight woman, right? Let's start from there. Is 70% of our economy, I believe, is consumer spending. So if our GDP is $21 trillion, mark $1 trillion for war, but $14 trillion of that is consumer spending, whether it's you're buying a purse, you're buying an iPhone, you're buying a car. Who controls consumer spending? Whether it's in your house or most people's houses, the women are responsible for a vast majority of consumer spending decisions, probably about 70% to 85%, depending on who you ask and survey. I think Procter & Gamble thinks it's like, 75, 80%, something like that. And so if you realize that in a $20 trillion economy, women are responsible for probably a slight majority of total consumer purchases or total purchases, right? Men might be responsible for a majority of investment purchases, but women are responsible for how a majority of dollars are spent within our economy. Okay. What are unique factors about women compared to men? Women are going to be more emotional than men. If you look at Big Five personality data, women are going to be about a quarter standard deviation above the average or above men in emotional positivity and emotional negativity. And so what that means is, women are going to be slightly more emotional than men are, and they're the target consumer. Okay. If you want to market a product to somebody, a good way to market a product, or an effective way, I won't say a good way, but an effective way to market a product is to make that person feel anxious or have the fear of missing out if they don't purchase that product. And so if you want women to buy your clothing or buy your cosmetics, you want women to actually feel like they're missing something if they don't purchase the product. And so billions of dollars are going to be invested into commercial messaging that subconsciously or consciously creates this feeling of inferiority in the consumer. because that's how the money comes, is when you make the consumer feel inferior for not buying your product. And so a byproduct of this is women are going, everybody, but women in particular, are going to be looking for coping mechanisms to manage the anxiety of not having the consumer goods that are being presented to them. And one way they're going to manage that anxiety is through food consumption, because a lot of people use food as if it were a drug.
Right.
And so the byproduct of using food as a coping mechanism is you're going to be very overweight, most people, right? So I think all of this is a byproduct of the extent to which women are being targeted and manipulated through consumer advertising, in addition to how our modern lifestyles have shifted, which is a completely other set of issues which do matter too. But I think if we start with the emotional, that's the emotional foundation that's being built. And then you layer on expectations for women having full-time corporate jobs. It's going to add more stress. It's also going to add more disposable income, more need for convenience. So they're going to be reaching for cheap processed foods more commonly. And then the female endocrine system is more complex than the male endocrine system. So if you're exposed to endocrine disruptors, whether they clean your tables, whether they clean your clothing, whether they clean your dishes, whether they are plastics that you use to eat food on the run, those are going to affect men and they're going to affect women. And I think both of those effects have a big impact on Pride Month and Pride politics that nobody wants to talk about. But the other thing is they're going to wreak havoc on the female reproductive system, just because that endocrine system happens to be a little bit more complex than the males.
Right. So let's talk about body positivity as a movement, right? How do these companies profit off of body positivity? So I know from a media perspective, right? So you have all these digital magazines that they run on advertisements, right? And so the more clicks and views they get, and so they want to create sensational content that also feeds into women's insecurity. So that's one of the personality differences between men and women as well, is that women tend to feel a lot more insecurity about the way that they look, about the way that they present themselves to the world. And so body positivity feeds this sort of vicious cycle. You're perfect just the way that you are. And then they feel really insecure because then they see other things online. They don't feel so perfect. And then they go back and they consume all this content. So these media companies make a lot of money off of creating very sort of like fat acceptance, body positivity content. But do you think companies are making profit off of selling products that are sort of connected to this body positivity movement? Because that's something I've been wondering a lot lately, is like, is there a lot of profit to be made off of convincing women that being fat is beautiful and virtuous?
Well, I think there's a couple different profit dynamics going on. Number one, you want to attract an audience. And so if you realize that as a media company, whether you're the Today Show, whether you're the New York Times, you want an audience that advertisers value, right? Because if you're going to sell advertising at an expensive price per thousand, you want eyeballs that translate into purchases in some capacity. And so because women are the primary consumer and the average American woman is like 30 pounds overweight, if you want to attract the most eyeballs that spend money, you need to create a message that fat women gravitate to. If fat women won't gravitate to it, you're not going to sell high-priced ads, unless you're the Wall Street Journal and you're selling to a slightly different audience. But if it is a mass market media production, if fat women don't like it, you're probably going to go bankrupt eventually. And so the content needs to be interesting to fat women. Now, the actual ads that are being served are going to be a combination of body positivity ads and body negativity ads. Because remember, making people feel neurotic and anxious also results in purchases. However, making people feel part of a community that respects them for who they are also results in purchases. So look at Dove. I think Dove was the first major brand to be connected with this body positivity movement. They sell soap. Everybody needs soap. Perhaps fat people need to buy more soap because they have greater surface area to cover. But if you ask people who work in hospitals, they don't seem to cover it very well. But everybody needs to buy soap. So why would you buy Dove soap versus some other soap? And it's like, well, it's because people have an emotional connection with the company that gets them, right? So the more people identify with, I am fat, as a permanent state rather than a temporary state. And it becomes an inextricable part of their identity.
It's who I am.
It's who I am. There's nothing I can do about it. Look at all these studies that show that you can't lose weight, right? Those studies are wrong, by the way, but we can get into that later. Look at all these studies that prove my condition to be unchangeable, right? New York City just passed an ordinance that classifies obesity, similar to like race and sex, and that
Yep.
you can't discriminate on the basis of it. And I expect that to actually expand dramatically and
Right.
probably impact the ability for fitness professionals to market their goods and services, across the internet in some capacity.
Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that.
Well, so I think the Democratic Party has done a tremendous job in monetizing victimization.
Yes.
And well, think about it, like everybody's a victim. If you realize that there are advantages in life that some people get and the majority of people don't for everything, whether it's hair color, skin tone, height, weight, wealth of parents, size of wrists, like you can probably do a study and show that like half of the people or the median person who has this trait is better or worse than average.
Right.
So you can have scientifically legitimate data that convinces people that this attribute is correlated with lack of success. Boom, you're a victim. And if people identify with that trait category, right, whether it's race, body size, sex, whatever, then you can create a victim group around it, and you can form a coalition that will support whatever political campaign you run. That also gives kickbacks to the corporate sponsors that put you there. And I think that's sort of why the Democratic Party has become the party of both corporate America and victims, is because corporate America can get all the subsidies that they want, the tax breaks, the H-1B visas, and undercut the pricing power of American labor if they're willing to make concessions to the social side, where they have their pride flags and talk about how welcoming and accepting they are of all the oppression, and how much they want to fight all the oppression in society.
Yeah, because if there's been a lot of talk of how conservatives can't define what woke is, but I mean, woke really is, it's through the lens of oppressor versus oppressed, but even more than that, it's oppressor versus oppressed based on inherent characteristics such as race, gender, sexual orientation, and now they've included obesity as an inherent characteristic that you're just born with, right? Genetically, you're wired to be fat. So that's why you see a lot of anything that's now woke. I mean, for a while now, it's included anything that's obese, anyone that's fat, because you can't help it, right? It's just something that you're born with, and all of the data now shows. And this is also like the obsession with peer-reviewed research and the obsession with data, because you can make data prove virtually anything.
Well, the reason I think why the peer-reviewed research shows that you can't fix fat is because the people conducting the research are stupid. And so, yeah, like if people pay me good money to create intelligently structured training plans, right? If you create an unintelligently structured diet and training plan, it won't work every time.
Yes.
Right? So you can study it over and over and over again, and it's not going to ever work.
That's right.
Right? So if you tell people, if you follow the calories in, calories out model, which for whatever reason has pervaded training in diet science for the last 50 years, and you think your metabolism is unchangeable, if you think your metabolism is static and can't be increased, then the only way you lose weight is by doing more exercise and eating less food. But that tends to not be sustainable for a lot of people, because they just end up accruing caloric deficits day after day after day after day, and they're hungry, and they can't be hungry forever. So it's almost like telling people that it's impossible to get rich, because we studied 100 people who saved 10% of their paychecks every pay period, and not a single one became a billionaire. And it's like, do you realize that's not how you become a billionaire? You don't become a billionaire by saving 5% of your paycheck every pay period. You become a billionaire by investing in or creating a company that has massive cash flow ability or potential. That's how you become a billionaire.
Right.
The way you become sustainably fit is by developing an endocrine system that has the capacity to burn through thousands of calories per day, right? And you don't do that typically by restrictive dieting. But all of the studies are like, well, this restrictive diet didn't work because they ate 1,800 calories for 6 weeks and they gained all the weight back. It's like, of course, I could have told you that would happen.
Well, duh. Yeah. Because you talk a lot about the calories in, calories out model and how it's just trash. So, I mean, you work with clients, right? What do you usually do with your clients? Do you usually work with male clients mostly? Is it a mix?
It's a mix. It's mostly men, and my system does work better for men than women. It has worked for women, but there's more qualifiers. Because in order for my system to be effective, it does help to have lean muscle mass, and men are going to have more lean muscle mass. It also helps to not have substantial sugar cravings, and women will have sugar cravings more frequently than men. But if you're a woman who has reasonable lean muscle mass, like you played a sport at some point in your life, varsity level, high school, say, and you don't have a ton of sugar cravings, my system should probably work for you. But that might only be 50% of women, 25% of women, whereas it's going to be a much higher percentage of men. So we want to focus on two things. We want to focus on how do we naturally restrict the amount of food that people consume, and how do we maximize the amount of calories that people burn outside of the gym. Because most fitness professionals want to focus on the calories you burn inside the gym, but that's not the right way to look at it. And if you structure your training plan in a certain way, you might only burn, like I'm going to go work out after this. I'm going to only burn 600, 800 calories in the gym. But I ate 38 ounces of meat yesterday, right? I'll probably eat 3,500 calories today. So somehow I'm going to go from burning 600 to 800 calories in the gym to eating 3,500 calories today and not being fatter tomorrow. Why is that? It's because what I'm doing in the gym is more important than the amount of calories that I'm burning in the gym. So when I'm in the gym, I'm going to force myself to lift heavy weights with my lower body. Because that's where a majority of your muscle mass is, and muscle mass is directly linked to metabolic rate. And I'm going to condition at a high rate, high intensity. Not for long, right? I'm not going to do 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes of cardio. I'm going to do 15 minutes of high intensity interval training. I might only burn 200 calories of that interval during that interval training, but it's going to translate into several hundred calories of passive burn. Right, meaning my metabolism is going to be on fire when I'm getting out of the gym. So much so that a client that I worked with last year, Andy, who's a part of our training group, one week he was super busy with work, didn't have time to do the lifting portion of the program. All he did was interval training, 4 days, say. So he did 60 minutes of total exercise that week, and he looks at his Apple Watch, and it says he's averaged 3,800 calories per day of calorie burn.
Wow.
Burning 200 calories a day, 4 days in the gym.
Wow.
Right? Now, it's an estimate. Those trackers, they're not always accurate, but they tend to be directionally accurate. So maybe he only burned 3,500 calories. Maybe he burned 4,000 calories. I don't know. But that's a very high calorie burn for only having done 60 minutes of total exercise in the gym, which means the exercise selection must have been good enough so that his metabolism wanted to run on super speed for the 23 and a half hours a day that he was not in the gym.
Yeah, what kind of interval training? Because I see you on the air bike a lot.
Yeah, that's mostly what we do.
Okay.
And we like the air bike because it's low joint impact.
Gosh, I hate the air bike.
Yeah, but that's why.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I hate it so much.
I bet if you did 15 minutes a week, and that includes rest. So I bet if you did 60 seconds on, 60 seconds off, repeat 8 times, do it twice per week, and tracked it like a lift. Track it like a lift. I'm serious.
Okay.
This is going to game changer for your group. Track it like a lift, because most people don't track cardio like it's a lift.
Right.
They I'm just going to go burn a couple hundred calories.
I'm just going to feel it.
Right. You're not going to get a metabolic impact if you just do it to do it. Just like you're not going to get stronger if you're I'm just going to go lift some weights. It's no, you need to track what you're doing so you know you're getting better at it over time. If you track what you're doing and you force yourself to get better over time, and you do, right, you'll probably increase your output by about 20% from month 1 to month 6. And you'll notice it. Everything is going to be tighter in your body just from doing that.
Should we get an air bike, honey? Or should we get an air bike in the garage?
Yeah, everybody should have one.
I want to see how much they are. Hold on. Can you substitute that with sprints?
You can, but sprints have more joint impact.
Right.
And so particularly for people who are over 200 pounds, women over 160 pounds or something like that, you don't want to do that. But even in my state, I'm going to go squat 300 and something pounds for reps later today.
Right.
So my knees at 37 years old can't handle the joint impact of running, then doing heavy squats and running again and doing heavy deadlifts. Something has to be mixed in. And so, yeah, you can get a new one for $600-700. You get a used one on Craigslist for a few hundred. The benefit of the used ones is somebody's already assembled it. So you don't have to assemble it. You just go pick it up and put it in your garage.
Because there's not many great gyms around here. Because you drove through this area, so you see how it's super suburban and it's still growing.
Yeah.
So the only gyms in this area are I think there's like an Orange Theory that just opened up, So there's like
build your own gym in your garage for $2,500.
Yeah, because we have everything else. We have a squat rack, we have dumbbells, we have kettlebells, we have a treadmill. So if it's like raining outside and I want to like get some steps in and the baby's sleeping, I can just get on the treadmill. But I think I kind of want an air bike.
Get it.
Okay.
Get it.
Okay.
And report, like do like monthly reports, and then 3 months, 4 months, you're like,
you say 60 on, 60 off?
Yeah. Track it.
60 seconds is a long time.
Well, you're
on the air
not
bike.
going 100%, right?
No,
like that's
still.
the thing is like obviously I'm not telling you to go. You can only go as fast as you can go. Right. So you're going to have to pace yourself, and so yeah, you don't go as hard as you can your first one. You might go as hard as you can your last one, but it's also 60 seconds, so you don't go as hard as you can the first 10 seconds. You pace yourself the whole thing. It's an entire event, and the goal, like for men. If men can get to about 18 calories per sprint interval on the assault bike, which is different than a Schwinn Airdyne because they all have different caloric trackers, but on the Rogue assault bike or the Rogue Echo bike, if a male can get to about 18 calories per interval times 8 intervals, so you're looking at 150 or so calories for that 8 interval cadence, very few fat men can do that. It's just not possible.
Right.
Like I ran and one reason why I don't believe in calories is I ran a Twitter offer a couple years ago, 3 years ago. It's still good, by the way, if anybody wants to participate. Find me one man who can parallel squat 315 pounds, run a 6-minute mile, who's over 12% caliper body fat. Now, obviously, there's some people in the NFL or college football players who would be all of the above because they have to eat to have such a size so they can play football. But if you found somebody off the street, there's just not that many fat people who can run 6-minute miles.
Yeah.
There just aren't.
No.
Why is that? Nothing about running a 6-minute mile requires you to not be fat. There's plenty, and people say, oh, well, the weight, you can't run that fast if you carry that much weight. It's like, I don't know, you can be 20% body fat at 180 pounds, right? As a man, there's plenty of men who are 20% body fat at 180 pounds. Why can't they run 6-minute miles? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's something about moving fast that translates directly to a fast metabolism. And that's something that all of these classes, all of these studies, all of these trainers are missing. And everybody's going to get it in 5 to 10 years because it's so obvious.
You know what? I will admit that's one thing that I don't work on a lot with my clients. We don't do a ton of cardio, especially because, there's also like the physiological differences with women too. There are certain times of our cycle where like high intensity cardio it's like just not right for us.
Just don't do it then.
But that's only like a quarter of the month, maybe.
Yeah, just don't do it those days.
Just don't do it that. Just don't do it those days. I mean, there's a lot of women that like they hate cardio, and a lot of times when like female trainers will promote their programs where like you don't have to do a ton of cardio to lose weight, which is true.
Right.
But if you want to really get to a certain level, that's one thing that it's definitely necessary. And I mean, I haven't really prioritized high intensity cardio probably since before I was pregnant.
Sure.
I do a lot of I run 2 or 3 times a week or I swim.
Yeah.
So I'll do like 3 cardio sessions a week. That's like a run or a swim, but it's like a 30-minute, more like moderate to low intensity.
Sure.
So now I'm really curious to see what
that. So people see. I don't know if you can pull up my before and after pictures for the audience, but
yeah, we'll throw them up there.
But my fat picture, I don't know if probably can't pick that up on.
Is it on your Twitter?
I'll
look at your media. Let's scroll through and see.
Yeah, but there's a lot of like random stuff on my media. There will eventually be a fat pic, but you might have to look at like 100 pictures.
Okay.
So I was fatter in my 20s.
I honestly can't believe that's you in that fatter picture. I've seen that photo of you.
I ran 4 miles every morning, 5 days a week.
You did?
Yes. People think, oh, he wasn't like dedicated to fitness. Like, absolutely I was. I ran 4 miles fasted every morning followed by weights.
Because I mean, you were an athlete,
right?
So
and
it's not like
I still trained like an athlete a little bit then. I do it differently now. So back then, I did 4 miles a day, which took me 30 minutes times 5 days a week. I did 150 minutes of cardio, and it was hard, right? Because people who do 30-minute cardio blocks know that they're hard.
Right.
Now I'm doing 2 15-minute sessions, really one 12-minute session, one 15-minute session, and one like 20 to 25-minute session a week. And between all of that, what is that? That's 50 minutes a week, right? So I'm doing 67% less cardio per week, and I'm way leaner at 37 than I was at 27 when I did 3 times more cardio.
That's
I
crazy.
eat very, very similarly. right? A little bit more protein dominant now than I was then.
Okay.
But the main catalyst for, yeah, there we go.
Here we go. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll send this to you, honey. We can throw this up there. So it will be here when you're looking at it. It's right here.
Yeah. And
I can't believe that's you. You look like your younger cousin, your younger, softer cousin.
Right. Right. And that's why, people look at that and they're like, oh, he's on steroids. It's like, no, I'm just like, I intelligently apply principles that work. So over a 10-year block of time, I've been able to do a lot of A/B testing on myself and notice, hey, these two endeavors take exactly the same amount of effort, but this one works better than that one. So let me do the one that works better. And I've applied this to how I do abs, how I structure my rep cadence for lifting, how I structure my cardio, how I structure my eating. All of it's just a game of Jenga, or a game of like investment optimization, where these two investments are equal in challenge, or equal in investment, and this one yields higher. Or this is a lower investment than this, but it yields higher, so I'm going to do that. And that's why my training program has become progressively easier over the years, while my results have become progressively better, is because if you get more intelligent in some area, you should be able to get better results with less effort.
Okay. Where were you in this photo?
Which one?
Were you in San Francisco?
That was in Dolores Park.
That was in Dolores. I thought so.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to think about getting an air bike. But another thing I wanted to ask you about was Pride Month. Mm-hmm. Tell me what's going on in Pride Month.
So this is very interesting, because when I was in high school in the Bay Area, California actually voted down gay marriage in 2004, maybe 2003, which surprises a lot of people because of how left-leaning California is right now. At that time, I would have said, yeah, gay marriage, whatever. Like, if you're all the same, I don't care. Like, do what you do. It doesn't matter to me. Because it didn't matter to me 20 years ago at all. I don't care. Do what you want to do in your private life. I think the Rubicon that's been crossed is like, don't embrace your private life in front of me. I don't care what it is. It's just like, there are some things that you don't need to be sharing out in public for positive attention, right? I don't care if you're gay. I don't care if you're straight. There's just no reason to call attention to yourself for certain attributes. And so I think Pride Month, I never understood Pride Month like 25 years ago, frankly. I'm like, what? Like, proud of it? Well, it's like, it's a part of you. Why would you be proud of? I'd be proud of winning things. Why would you be proud of, like, the type of people you're attracted to? I still feel like that. Why would you be proud of the type of people you're attracted to? Would you be proud that you want to drive a Ferrari? Should you have a parade because you want to buy a house? Like, you should have parades for winning things and accomplishing things. And I think any type of celebration that calls attention to an attribute that doesn't make you a better person for having it, eventually, I guess, falls into the Marxist camp of identity politics. And so, I think over the last 10 years, what we've seen is like a corporate takeover of Pride Month, which, as I referenced earlier, companies have become very good at, like, draping their desire to exploit American workers and not pay taxes with these social causes to make them come off as morally superior to everybody else. And, if you can read a balance sheet or read an income statement and understand how advertising works, it's a little bit nauseating.
Yeah, yeah. Because we were joking that we're going to film at the very start of Pride Month, but, it's obvious that things have been taken to another level where it's like, I think people are just sick of having it thrown in their face.
Yeah.
But here is something that I've been thinking about lately with the controversy with Bud Light and Dylan Mulvaney being on the cover or being on the beer can, and then the ad he did in the bathtub, and then also the ad he did for Nike, and then Target doing all of the Pride stuff with like the tuck-friendly underwear for kids. I mean, so you see a lot of conservatives sharing that Bud Light has lost a lot in sales. Is this something that is actually hurting Anheuser-Busch? Or, because this is something I've been thinking, it's like, even if people boycott these brands, and even if they temporarily lose some sales, if temporarily lose some revenue, there's something more valuable to them, which is the social credit of participating in this intersectional woke agenda that will gain a certain image with these mainstream machines, with celebrities, with influencers, with progressive politicians. Like, there's something here that's more valuable to them than temporary revenue, which is this kind of social credit.
Yeah. I think that's true, though perhaps not in cases that result in a mass boycott. So I think, out of 200 instances of sponsoring, like a transgender spokesperson, 199 are not going to result in that type of backlash. And maybe they do result in a very small revenue drop, if you could even attribute it to it, which you can't. Like, let's just say you could, and it did. But if you had, a greater ESG score and benefited from being able to access capital at a lower rate due to a greater ESG score, or your equity was part of a progressive index that got purchased more by retirement funds due to your higher ESG score, then I think you could justify it. But I don't think what's happening is necessarily as nefarious as what you're describing. I think what's going on is, if you look at marketing and you look at PR, the vast majority of people who populate marketing and PR departments are women, or they're people who are attracted to men, right? I worked at Google, and the vast majority of people who populated the marketing floor are people who are attracted to men. And so who's attracted to men? It's heterosexual women and gay men,
dudes.
right? And so how do those people tend to vote politically? Probably 75% of them vote Democrat.
Right, of course.
And you also layer in the fact that most of them are young.
Right.
So young people who are attracted to men sexually almost always vote Democrat. So these people are the people who work at the major advertising agencies. These people who are the people who populate the marketing and PR departments within corporations. And so these are the people who are deciding what is the image of our brand. So of course the images of all of these brands are going to skew further and further left when you think about the people who they hire to make marketing decisions.
Like the woman from Bud Light, Alyssa Heinerstein. Yeah, right. She's a perfect example. She's she's a heterosexual woman, mom with like 2 kids via surrogate, lives in Manhattan, fits the bill. And then you have all these brands like Oreo and Ben & Jerry's, even during the BLM riots, like they were posting all this stuff like pro BLM. You have all these companies that have like nothing to do, they like sell junk food, and all the execs are, most of them are women, are straight women, or gay dudes. It's interesting that you lump it into people who are attracted to men versus like generally you'll hear that it's women who are the ones that are, the execs here, but it also makes much more sense to include gay men because they do vote much more Democrat, much more to the left than straight men do.
Yeah, and I think, if you look at brain scans of heterosexual women and gay men, the brain scan images look more similar than like gay men to straight men. So there are some, and I'm not a neurologist by any means, but there are some like synapses similarities between heterosexual women and gay men in terms of how their brains are structured. Clearly, if they're both attracted to men, and I think if you think about the art of attraction, right, that's something that people who are attracted to men will inherently need to specialize in, right? People who are attracted to women are going to be more interested in domineering, right? So you look at the people who tend to rise in investment banks or multinational corporations historically. It's going to or sports. It's going to typically be heterosexual men and gay women, right? So those are the people who are going to be neurologically wired to scale hierarchies. The people who are going to be neurologically wired to attract a partner who is wired to scale a hierarchy need to be adept in understanding laws of attraction, right? And so they're gonna end up being much more aesthetically focused and surface image focused with how they perceive the world, naturally they're gonna make for better fits within a marketing department, because that's exactly what a marketing department does.
Right.
Is it's responsible for the facade that the company projects to the world.
So do you think that other companies are looking at what's been happening to Bud Light and Target, and they're seeing this as a kind of warning? Because that's how a lot of people on the right are framing it. They're like, keep doing it, guys, keep boycotting, because these other companies are going to take a signal from what's happening with Bud Light losses. I think Target lost tens of billions in revenue in the last couple of weeks or something.
Perhaps market capitalization.
Okay.
There's no way they're doing that much revenue in a
Okay.
3-week period.
Yeah.
I think it's actually interesting. This is the first time I thought about this. I bet there is a little bit of a civil war going on within a lot of companies, because you have to realize that one of the reasons why this woke agenda has proliferated so much and so fast is because people are afraid to say obviously true things that stop it, right? So I imagine that there are people within these corporations who are shitting their pants, thinking like, I don't want this to happen to us.
Right.
But how can I say something and not pose a risk of jeopardizing my career, right? Certainly there's going to be some self-censorship within these companies. And then what the woke people are very good at is creating conflict in a way that they know their opposition won't stand up to. So what I think is probably happening within these companies is, hey, now's a chance for us to take a stand. Look at what's happening with all of these, because they stigmatize conservatives as hateful people, right? And they talk about conservatives as like being fascists and Nazis. So in their mind, everybody who doesn't agree with them is a fascist or a Nazi. So they're fighting in their mind a very noble fight to extinguish Nazis and fascists. And hey, we need to take a stand and let everybody know that we don't stand for fascism and we don't stand for hate. And now is the right time for us to pour more fuel on the fire, right? So I actually bet that some of these companies will look at what's happening with Target and Bud Light and end up doubling down on it even more.
Interesting. Yeah. And I've been wondering that too, because you see people like Matt Walsh talking a lot about how keep going, guys, this is really making a difference. And I don't want to be black-pilled or Debbie Downer, but I'm really wondering, like, I'm not saying we shouldn't boycott the brands. Like, we should vote with our dollar, but I'm really sitting here wondering, like, is it really making that much of a difference? Like, are we going
eventually it will. Like, if you extinguish the brand is done, right? If the companies, if the companies actually face multiple quarters of revenue declines and stock trade downs, and like they're going to have to clear.
But you have to think about it. Like, Anheuser-Busch has how many different beverages? You know.
Yeah, but if they all follow similar marketing strategies, and it's obvious that this strategy isn't good for what we're doing, then there's going to have to be some sort of come to Jesus moment within these large corporations. Like, yeah, we probably can't be doing this anymore.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I hate to be like sort of black pill, but it's kind of like these companies they've got so much reach and they've got so many different brands. It's like, even if you boycott just one, remember the Balenciaga thing with the kids and the little teddy bears or whatever? The parent company, Balenciaga's got so many different fashion brands that all these the women who are boycotting Balenciaga, like, they buy from the other brands too. So it's almost like, what are we really doing here? Like, is it really working?
Well, you need to expand the boycott to all of them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of people were sharing, like, hey, they also own, I mean, I don't know what the other brands are, maybe not Kate Spade, but like they own a ton of other brands. And they're like, if you're going to boycott, you have to like fully boycott. So I don't know. I mean, what do you think the goal is in coming after kids?
Well, if you look at the entire, like, if you connect the dots for the entire progressive agenda, it is to destabilize social units that pose a threat to government power, right? Destabilize the church, destabilize families.
Right.
And, one of the easiest ways to destabilize families is you force a woman out of a primary caregiver role into a corporate serf. You put economic pressure on them that ends up dissolving more families. You have more single mothers. And then I think the last step is you sexualize the children, right? And so all of that will result in more broken families, and the subsequent inability to form bonds that create families. So that's what you have to think, like 40 years out, if you have all these hypersexualized children, are they going to be able to form nuclear families? There's a very good chance they won't.
Yeah.
And so even if sexualizing children itself doesn't break up families today, if it prevents families from forming 40 years from now, and the state is still here, then the statists win.
Right. Yeah, it's the long game.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even think about it that way, but it's so true because, people are like, oh, what does it matter how many people you sleep with? Well, obviously, first of all, for all of human history, we've acknowledged that the more people you engage sexually with, the harder it's going to be to fully bond with your life partner. And then you also have a lot of research showing that the higher the body count, the more likely it is for someone to get divorced, which, correlation doesn't necessarily always mean causation. But then there's a lot of research coming out showing that a woman who has a higher body count does have a very difficult time pair bonding with whoever her husband is going to be. And so
which came first?
Exactly. That's a question too, which came first. But you can't deny, you over-sexualizing the children and essentially putting them in these positions where they're like, it's like a lot of these kids are doing a form of pornography online that 50 years ago would have been just considered porn. Yeah. But today it's just considered like kids being silly online.
Right.
And it's so detrimental to them at such a young age. And it's really, I don't know, it really freaks me out. That's one thing I'm a little bit black-pilled about.
Well, and people would joke about how conservatives would always talk about slippery slopes. And I remember as a young kid hearing about Elvis shaking his hips on TV and learning about the commotion that caused. I'm like, what are you talking about? He just shook his hips. What's the big deal? It's like, oh, actually 60 years after Elvis shook his hips on TV, we're having drag queen at library shows with children in it. So maybe those crazy Southern Baptists were right about something back then.
Yeah, I mean, actually, one thing I've been talking about a lot in my group is I think the slippery slope started even earlier when the multi-generational family was broken down.
Could be, yeah.
And the nuclear family, the Western American nuclear family was created. This idea of husband and wife and children separated from the rest of their family. Grandparents, cousins, aunts, uncles, extended family. And even further than that, a little over 100 years ago, it was very common for servants and apprentices to live on the land or in the home or on the property with these families. That would help with childcare. That would help with all sorts of things around the house. And you have this very large, strong family unit of blood relatives and also some people who were part of your family that were not even necessarily blood. And you had this very, very strong unit. And then once industrialization happened, and then you have all of these young single people moving to cities to find better work. I mean, of course, we live in a time now where it's kind of impossible to return to the sort of multi-generational living that we had previously. But I think once you separated this nuclear family from the multi-generational living, I think you broke down a lot of the strengths of family that people once had. And I think it's made people more susceptible to divorce. It's made people more susceptible to liberal ideologies. It's made people more susceptible to loneliness, isolation. I mean, a lot of times when I hear people talk about the trad wife, they're talking about, women. I quit my job to be home with my daughter. Like I'm 100% supportive of mothers raising their kids, right? However, I think that we're doing a disservice to ourselves and our families if we're not admitting that the way that American society is set up right now in terms of the white picket fence, nuclear family, it's a very lonely, isolating, sort of depressing experience for mothers and wives. Yeah. You think about it, like a lot of these women, and then you also couple it with the decline of organized religion. Because probably even just 50, 70 years ago, even if there were these isolated pockets of nuclear family, they were part of a very strong church community. And they had a lot of other families where they were able to raise kids with and provide education for and childcare. But now you have a lot of these moms who are stuck at home all day, husband's off at work, and he's able to still socialize and do a lot of the things that men have always done for all of human history. And then you end up with these wine o'clock mommies because they don't have a church community to be a part of. They don't even really have a strong group of other mom friends with kids in their neighborhood where you can just go next door. What are you doing? Help each other with the kids. And so you leave a lot of these wives and mothers with a very isolated existence. Yeah. And I kind of understand why so many young women don't want to become wives and mothers, because it looks very, very lonely. And so part of me thinks that a lot of this breakdown of the family really started initially with the separation of the multi-generational family.
And that's actually the American dream, right? And so the reframing that would be to ask, is the pursuit of the American dream the pursuit of false idols? And is the byproduct of the pursuit of false idols breakdown of the community and breakdown of a traditional family structure? And I think it is. This is the first time I thought about this. But what would have been the catalyst for people breaking down the traditional multi-generational family? It would be people moving off of farms into cities.
Right.
So how did they get people to leave? Because during the Great Depression, before the Great Depression, half of Americans were farmers.
Yes.
There was a time when most of the jobs in the country were getting food out of the ground,
right,
rather than typing on a computer or like building things with your hands. And so somehow these factories had to incentivize workers to move away from working on their family farm and move to the city to work in the factory. So how did they do that? They talked about, oh, we have a pension, right? Because you're not going to have your kids take care of you as you get older because you moved away and you don't have that multi-generational thing. So you have a pension. And so rather than having families rely on each other to service them in their elder years and their age of retirement, 60 and older, they're relying on a company to pay a pension, right? And rather than relying on their family to help take care of their small children, they're relying on paid caregivers. So all of it is stimulative to the economy because it requires you spending dollars in multiple areas for services that would have otherwise been freely provided by your parents.
That's right.
And so it's economically stimulative. And as that model worked to attract many people away from farms to cities, which boosted real estate values, which made home builders profits. And as home builders made more and more profits, then they could have money for advertising and justify the advertising, creating this ideal of owning your own house with a white fence and your own car. And then the car manufacturers benefit from this too, because if everybody lives together and works at their house, which is what a farm is, you don't need a car. But when everybody works in a city, and then, oh, well, maybe you don't want to live in the city, you have your own house in the suburb, well, you need a car to get to the city if public transportation isn't very good. And so what attracts people to all of this, it is the worship of false idols, thinking that I'm going to be happier if I get this car. I'm going to be happier if I get this house. And, maybe you are temporarily, but a lot of times people aren't. And they end up becoming less happy because of the amount of debt that they need to go into in order to service these status symbols that they feel like they need to project a level of success to their outside world that they don't actually hold because they exchanged perceived status for corporate debt, for being a servant to a company that will chew them up and spit them out at its convenience.
Yeah, I see that too. And I think it's sad because one thing that people on the right really get wrong is they're not willing to really have this conversation. They're not willing to talk about how this separation of the nuclear family has been detrimental more to wives than it has been to husbands. Because if you think about it, like the husband still is doing like what he's always done, which is get out of the house, be with other men, provide, protect. But then when you separate the nuclear family, the woman is robbed of a lot of the things that she used to have in order to perform her duties.
Well, and if you think about the left and the right, they are amalgamations of dissimilar groups that have similar goals, right? So the left just kind of aggregates all these people who feel like they're victims and they just fight for victimization rights. The left is a weird pairing of socially conservative people the right is a weird pairing of socially conservative people and economically conservative people. And there is an overlap between the two. Like libertarian people might be a decent overlap between the two. But at the extremes, there is a contradiction in ideology because the hardest capitalists, the most profit-seeking individuals want to exploit their workers. Right? Because that's how you make more money. That's how you make more profits. And so the way you exploit your workers is by hiring vulnerable people, right? And so I often thought 10 years ago that the reason why the Republican parties had traditionally been like pro-family and why corporate America had traditionally been pro-family is because the more you can get your employees to have kids and lever up on a mortgage, the less likely they are to complain when you give them more and more work and don't increase their wages. Right? You want, the devious profit-seeking corporation wants its employees to be vulnerable.
Right.
And so on some level, there has been a truce between these groups that are in a little bit of opposition so they can achieve mutually beneficial goals. But on the periphery, there is that contradiction in the right where, do you want the traditional family or do you want to exploit workers? Because on some level, you can't have both.
That's really interesting. I never thought about it like that. I mean, I think that as a whole, the right does kind of a poor job at identifying these sorts of things. I feel like, and the left does this too, but I feel like it's more prevalent on the right. The right has a really hard time admitting some of the shortcomings of not necessarily their values, but the way they get things done.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? It's like they just really don't want to admit that some of the things that we promote and some of the things that we support are not actually as great for families as we think they are.
Well, I think this has more to do with whichever political party is in power, because Democrats were not good at this 20 years ago, right? A lot of Americans did not support George W. Bush, but he stayed in office for 8 years, right? So what I really think happened over the last 25 years is the Democrats were sick of losing logical arguments because if you look at like Gore versus Bush or Kerry versus Bush, it was like logical argument versus like propagandistic rhetoric, right? Democrats probably had more logical, you might disagree with their logic, but the way they tried to convince people was to pull logical levers. And they got their asses kicked 2 elections in a row. And I think they realized like the right's doing better than us at raising money, and they're better than us at invoking emotional responses in their voters. Enter Barack Obama. Barack Obama then becomes much better at raising money than his predecessors. They focus on raising money from the emerging economy, the tech sector, rather than like oil, gas, finance, although Obama raised plenty of money from Wall Street. And Obama was a master of rhetoric. And so all of a sudden, the strengths that had been unique to the Republican Party for the previous 2 election cycles, all of a sudden were now being mastered by the Democrats. And the Democrats did it in 2008, and they did it in 2012. And then in 2016, the Republicans got much better at the rhetoric game. But it's whoever's better at rhetoric is going to get the voters in basically a democracy where anybody can vote.
Right. Okay, last sort of thing I wanted to ask you. Do you follow the red pill manosphere movement?
I have on the periphery for like 10 years. I think when I first started spending more time on the internet, you read like Return of Kings and you think it's hilarious and you just kind of keep reading it for amusement purposes. I've never followed it thinking that it was anything more than a caricature of things that are true. Like I think it's reflective of things that are true, but I think it's a caricature of things that are true.
Yeah, because you see now they're encouraging guys to get vasectomies at a young age.
Really?
Yeah, that's one of the red pill guys. I forgot his name, but he's like, I think they call him the godfather of the manosphere or something like that.
Okay.
And he was like, how to be a high value man, like maybe the second or third thing was get a vasectomy.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, what? I don't know how we've crossed into territory now. And also the advice is like, don't start a family at a young age.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. I was just curious to hear what you thought about where that movement is headed, because I think in the beginning it identified a lot of issues that men needed to identify.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it was the society is really set up to benefit women, and identifying the fact that in terms of divorce and custody, women always get the upper hand and things like that. And identifying things like hypergamy. But I feel like the movement has taken a weird turn where it's very odd, the advice that they're giving to young men.
So not having read any of those articles, I can offer this guess. My guess is if you look at how men are controlled within our society, it is through their relationships with women and through kids, right? So men do not have to pay a higher tax rate than women do. Well, they do only because marginal taxes are higher than at higher incomes, and men are at higher incomes. But if I make $250,000 and you make $250,000 and we're both single and we don't have kids, we pay the same taxes, right? If we live in the same state, same county. The difference comes is when there are marriages and children involved, because once you involve a woman and a child, then the state comes into play to separate resources in case of dissolution, right? And because the state almost always sides with the woman in a situation like this, in the way you avoid a state siding with the woman is to avoid the situation entirely.
Right.
Right? And so if you realize that if you have kids and the woman decides to leave, you're screwed. The only way you avoid it is by avoiding the state, which you can't, or avoiding the woman.
Right.
Right? And so I think my guess is that's the logic behind it. Is like, well, the state is set up against us, but the state can't exercise its power if we don't do that.
If we don't engage with a woman, right? That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of content these days geared towards young men, and it's funny because you see a lot of the content geared towards young women, and it's mostly fat acceptance, body positivity, sexual promiscuity, and then you go to the other side and you see what's being marketed towards men. A lot of it's like entrepreneurship, and I don't know. I feel like one of the things I feel like is pushed too much on young people is entrepreneurship. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but I feel like we have romanticized what it means to be an entrepreneur, and we're like really encouraging people from a young age, like in their 20s, like start a business, like do it now, like start early. And not that everyone should be 9-to-5 slaves, but I don't know if it's really useful and productive to over romanticize what it means to be an entrepreneur and really encourage people to get into it from a very young age.
Well, I think the only way you inspire people to do things is by romanticizing the upside or by exaggerating the downside of not doing it, right? The United States itself attracted labor from around the world by romanticizing entrepreneurial opportunities within the United States, right? How else would you get somebody to sell everything in Europe, move to the US, move whole families over to the New World without this idea of American exceptionalism or the prospect of untapped wealth in the New World? So the only way you get people to leave the farms and come to the cities, to leave the old world, come to the new world, to leave their 9-to-5 and start entrepreneurship is by romanticizing the upside of that decision. I think a lot of people who are romanticizing the upside of the decision in every circumstance I mentioned are those who can benefit from it, right? So the people who are romanticizing entrepreneurship, chances are a lot of them are selling coaching services to aspiring entrepreneurs, right? And so a lot of, and this applies to everything in life, a lot of the ideas that you think are good because somebody's trying to sell you something. Oh, you want that nice car? You think you just want it, or you think you want it because BMW has been peppering you with ads at every turn that you go for the last 6 months? You think you really wanted that house on your own, or do you think it's because you've been fed images of consumerism for multiple hours a day, every day for the last 20 years of your life? The average American consumes like 5 hours of screen content a day. And so within that 5 hours, you're probably seeing an hour worth of ads, half hour worth of ads every day from the age of like 6 years old on. And so we're constantly being peppered romanticized images of what something would be like if we did this or if we had that. Almost always those images are being created by people who will profit from you thinking a certain way. Same thing could be said about working at a corporation, right? Why would you go to graduate school so you could be a lawyer? Why would you go to graduate school so you could be a banker? Those jobs suck.
Yeah, right.
Be a nurse. Those jobs suck.
Right.
They're terrible.
Yeah.
If you ask somebody there, hey, would you do it again if you knew what you had to go through to get there? Most of them would say no.
No. Yeah.
Everything, because that's what happens when life sucks. And the options within an economy are dwindling, is most of the people, when they get to the end of the road, have been sold a lie in some capacity. And they don't like what they're doing, but they're kind of stuck because they've already invested, they're pot committed, they've been an attorney for 7 years, they have a house, they have a mortgage, they can't stop doing it. And so they're just going to ride it out. Right. Same thing with being a banker. Same thing with a lot of decisions is people kind of buy into lies and they double down when it's not working and they keep doubling down, and then they're just unhappy with the end result. And I tell people who I coach, that's normal. That is the average outcome for most people if they don't try to take life by the horns and make it into the life that they want to live.
Yeah, that's why so many people go through midlife crises.
Yeah.
Yeah, like women in their 40s, they realize they're unhappy with kids, or men in their 40s.
Like, you're supposed to, because everything you've done has been laid out for you by somebody who wants to take advantage of you, and it sucks, and you're correctly understanding that it sucks. It's like, you don't have depression, you just realize that your life sucks.
That's so depressing. Oh, it's so true. Okay, we got to wrap. Tell everybody where to find you.
Find me on Twitter, find me on Instagram, Alex Feinberg 1 on Twitter. Create more edgy content there. Alex Feinberg Official on Instagram if you want to lay those icons out underneath.
You'll put them down there.
Alex Feinberg 1, I believe, on YouTube. I don't think it's straight Alex Feinberg. I think it's Alex Feinberg 1 on YouTube.
You like to upset people on Twitter, which I enjoy.
Yeah.
It's very fun.
Yeah.
Twitter's become more fun since Elon took over, don't you think?
It has more bots, unfortunately, but it's been more fun.
The community notes make it really fun.
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks, everyone. All the links are in the description. Thank you, Alex. Bye-bye.
Thank you. That's great.